2005. I'm Joe Bruckner, and I'm here with Mr. Henry Grady Black of Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm interviewing Mr. Black in connection with the Veterans History Project that's being commissioned by the Library of Congress and conducted by the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Black, would you give me your full name, where you were born, and when you were born, please?
Well, I was born on November the 7th, 1924, here in Atlanta, Georgia, and my full name is Henry Grady Black, Jr.
First, I want to thank you for taking your time to come down here. It's an honor to have you here and to meet you, and we're looking forward to hearing about your experiences and growing up and in World War II. Would you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your family?
Sure. Do you have to turn this off to, if I drink it?
No. You feel free to drink water or coffee or whatever you want.
I was born here in Atlanta, Georgia, as I said, in 1924. And I guess you would say that I was born sort of with a silver spoon in my mouth, but by the time I came along, the Depression was right in the middle of, we were right in the middle of the Depression, so my family didn't have much of a silver spoon left at that time. But anyway, I was brought up in the public hospitals, public secondary schools here. I went to 10th Street School, and I went to R.L. Hope School, and then I went to Marist College, as it was known, down on Ivy Street. After I graduated from Marist, which was a military day school, I thought the war was almost upon us. I guess it was upon us, pretty much. But my father thought I should get ready for the war by being an aeronautical engineer. And that's the biggest mistake he ever made, because I went to Georgia Tech, and I started in the summer semester, and I was used to partying with my high school friends every Friday night, and the mechanical drawing class was on Saturday morning, and I don't think I could have drawn a straight line with a T-square. But anyway, my father was Henry Grady Black, and he was in investment banking, as most of my family have been before me, either the banking or the investment banking field, either in Atlanta or in New York. I guess the most illustrious ancestor I have was Henry W. Grady, who died at age 39 in 1889. But he was supposed to have done more than any other man after the Civil War to bring the North and South together. He was editor of the Atlanta Constitution, and he was very much involved with politics and everything that went on around here. And he was a great believer in the South being a agrarian land, and the North being industrial. He was trying to bring the two together, and he did a lot, but he died early, and I don't know what he would have done if he'd lived much longer. But my grandfather, one grandfather, was Eugene R. Black, who died in 1934. But he was a banker here in Atlanta, and during the Depression, Franklin Roosevelt was president at that time, and he called my grandfather, Mr. Black, to Washington, and he became head of the Federal Reserve Bank for the whole country. died when he was in that job, and he died relatively early too. My uncle, who was also in the investment banking or banking business, was head of the president of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is commonly known as the World Bank. So I had banking in my background. My other grandfather was J.P. Allen, who had a large department store here in Atlanta.
Those are prominent Atlanta names you just mentioned.
Well, trying to live up to them at times. From after graduating from Marist, and I went to Georgia Tech, and I didn't last there very long. I was about 17, maybe 16 years old, and I had nothing but play and having fun on my mind. So my father saw he was wrong as far as me being an architectural engineer. So I went over to, he was an alumni, and most of my family have been alumni at the University of Georgia. The journalism school over there is named after my great-grandfather. And but so I went over to Georgia, where I continued to have a good time, because all of us knew at about that time that the war was either had started or was upon us, and really the only thing we were thinking about is getting out of school and joining one of the services. So my time at the University of Georgia was the best time I ever had in my life, but I don't know how much I learned, but we were all sort of playing and running back and forth to Atlanta. But anyway, on or about my birthday, which was November the 7th, I enlisted I was 18, I enlisted in the Naval Cadet Selection, the Naval Air Corps as a cadet.
And this was 1942?
42, yeah. And it just so happened that the head of the cadet selection board here was a man named Guy Benedict, who's from Connecticut, and he became socially a great friend of my father's, and he was in our house all the time, and he kept encouraging me to go in the Air Corps and become a pilot and so forth. Well, I did, and there were 2 or 3 months there before they called me up. I enlisted right after my 18th birthday, and I waited for a call, and they finally did call me, and I went over to the University of South Carolina for sort of what the Army calls boot training, but that wasn't much fun, but it's the middle of the summer, it was hot. And so after that, the next step in the naval pilot program was to see if you could fly. And it sent me down to St. Petersburg, Florida, and we started flying these Cub 2-wing planes, little planes, where you had an instructor and a student up there. And they had given me all sort of medical tests before I joined up, but they found out that I had no depth perception whatsoever when I got down there, because I nearly killed a couple of instructors flying through telephone wires and everything else, and that wouldn't be a great way to start the landing on a carryout, I suppose. So they sent me back to Atlanta, and Commander Benedict, I just spoke about, a friend of my father's, and he was head of the whole program in Atlanta. So we didn't catch this before, but I've got three options that you can do. He said, first of all, you can stay in Atlanta and be my chauffeur for the rest of the war. Well, I didn't think much of that because I was trying to get out of Atlanta with all my play friends and so forth. And then he said, oh, you can go to V12 school, which was a officer training program where you had to go through so many years of about 2 years of training, and then you became a deck officer. Had nothing to do with airplanes. A deck officer in the Naval Air Corps. And the third thing, that didn't appeal to me particularly because I just gotten out of school and I didn't have any. All my friends had gone off or were going off in service, and I didn't particularly want to go back to college and start all that all over again. So he said the third thing you can do is you can go to sea as a second class seaman, and I don't know where they'll send you, but I can arrange that. So I said, okay, give me number 3. I just wanted to move on, but I wasn't very happy about being a second class seaman. Although, looking back on it, I'm glad I did. I thought I learned a different way of life, and it was very eye-opening to associate with a lot of boys or men that had much different backgrounds than I had, and you know, when you with them for 3 years, you get to know them pretty well, and I've always said, you know, when I was in the Navy and in the Pacific, where I was almost all my career in the Navy, I was very homesick like everybody, hated the food, hated the officers. Although I did get to know some officers I liked a lot, and some men too. But anyway, but now looking back on it, it's one of the highlights of my life because I think I probably changed from a boy to a man during those 3 years. But and it was a great experience. I was very fortunate. Didn't get any injuries or hurt, but we were shot at all the time, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But it was exciting at times and very boring most of the time. But anyway, they sent me up to Norfolk, Virginia on a troop train, and we drove down in the middle of the night to a place, I can't think, I'll think of it in a minute, but it was a place, an amphibious training camp outside of Norfolk. And we got there in the middle of the night, it was pouring down rain, and the mud was ankle deep, and I had a duffel bag on my shoulder, and I wasn't very happy at that time because they lined us up outside of a Quonset hut. And I asked somebody what we were doing lining up outside. This was 12 or 1 or 2 at night, and what we were doing there, and they said, well, this is where you're going to get assigned to a ship. So anyway, I finally got to the head of the line, and there were 4 or 5 officers sitting there behind maybe 5 or 6 models of ships in the amphibious fleet, and they said to me, Black, what kind of ship would you like to be on? You can be on any one of these you want, and pointed to all the models. I said, I don't know anything about any of them, but just put me on the biggest one you got. So anyway, that started my career as a seaman, I guess, and I stayed there for a few weeks, I think. I don't think I had to go through the training period there because I'd already done that in the naval air program. But eventually I was sent to Hingham, Massachusetts, Quincy, Massachusetts, and it was the Hingham shipyard, and they were building these LSTs, which are known as landing ship tanks, and they are the largest of the amphibious force. They have about 110 men on them and about 10 officers, and they were building our ship, which was known as LST number 908, and so I got there, and the ship was just being built. So I really don't remember where I stayed there, probably in some barracks somewhere, but I remember it's just outside of Boston, and I used to go down to Rhode Island to the Narragansett racetrack every afternoon because I didn't have anything else to do, and we didn't seem to care. So anyway, I waited around there a couple of months, and I knew some girls that went to school in Boston, which didn't work either. But finally the ship was commissioned, and we after we took it out of the dock or what it was built, I can't remember the name. We headed down to the Chesapeake Bay, where we spent about 2 weeks on what they called well, it was a training cruise, because our ship had 10 officers, and only one of them had ever been to sea before, and that was an old quartermaster that had been made an officer when the war started, and our captain ran a cruise boat out of Miami, Florida, and all the others were just like me, out of nowhere.
What was your job responsibility on the ship?
Well, of the 100 officers, they tried to fit the men to what they thought we might be capable of. And since I'd gone to pre-flight school and had some navigation background there, classes and so forth, my job on the ship was I was a quartermaster. Well, I guess it started out as a seaman, where I was in the quartermaster, which is the person that helps the executive officer with all the navigation, and you're always up on the bridge with the skipper, particularly in landing details and so forth. And it was a pretty plush job, although I did have to stand night watches like everybody else, but okay, it was usually up on the bridge where it was at least warm. But we went to stay about 2 or 3 weeks down in Chesapeake Bay, and then they sent us up to, I'll never forget this, Bayonne, New Jersey, which we were going to pick up some cargo. It turned out it was 240,000 cases of beer, which they put down where the tanks and everything go. And so when we were all about 18, 19, and we found a way to get out to the beer. And I remember sailing out of New York New York Harbor, passing the Statue of Liberty, and we were down there drinking hot beers, singing "Anchors Away," and I'll never forget it because it was so. I mean, we didn't. It was just we didn't care anything.
That's a good way to go to war.
But anyway, we somehow got the ship with one officer. Nobody as an enlisted man had ever been to sea before, and we took the ship down to. We stopped at Guantanamo Bay. I don't remember for what reason. But then we went on down to the Panama Canal, excuse me, and went through the Panama Canal at night. And I remember that I brought my little 1-inch mattress up from below and slept out on the deck of the ship while we were going through the Panama Canal, so I could sort of watch what was going on. But it was also the most beautiful night up to that time I think I'd ever seen, because it was stars and it was just a wonderful feeling just to be out that night by myself and thinking about what I wanted to, and finally we got through the Panama Canal and we went up to San Diego to get I guess ready to go to the Pacific. And we were there 3 or 4 days, which was sort of fun, and we did, some of us went down to Tijuana, Mexico. And but the strangest thing happened while we were in Mexico, while we were in San Diego. The night before we would leave the ship out at San Diego, everybody knew that we were going to the Pacific. We didn't know specific or when or anything, but that night, during the night, the doctor on the ship, one of the 10 officers, and 8 of the enlisted men took these steel hatches that you on the deck of the ship that they're real heavy, and they were supposed to make the ship airtight and everything. And each one of them, one officer and 8 men, slammed that hatch down their arm and broke their arms. And they obviously couldn't go to the Pacific with a broken arm, so they were all sent to the brig or somewhere. I never heard of them again, but when we got to Pearl Harbor on the way to the South Pacific, we had to have those men replaced. And that just shows how much some people really were afraid of, scared, and didn't want to go, for one reason or another.
What were your emotions as you left, knowing you were going to the Pacific?
I was sort of excited. I've always thought I lived on the edge, and I think back in those days, I was too young to really. I really didn't know what the war was all about at that point. I know when Pearl Harbor happened, I was spending the night with a friend here in Atlanta, and this friend's brother was at Pearl Harbor. I didn't have any idea where Pearl Harbor was, and we were sitting around the breakfast table and got to listen to the radio, and they started talking about all the deaths and the Japs bombing Pearl Harbor. So I really didn't know much about it. I didn't. Well, I guess I read a lot then, but I just wasn't aware of what it was all about. And so it didn't take me long though after I was in the Pacific. Well, we left San Diego and went to Honolulu. I think we dropped off the beer there, and I think we hit a few cases of it. But anyway, from Hawaii, where we only stayed two or 3 days, we went to the South Pacific. Our first stop was Guadalcanal, and from that time for almost 3 years, I never saw a white woman again. I never got it. I was so young and didn't have any family, so I didn't have any what they call points to get some perks about going home or anything. I just thought I was
Expendable.
expendable, and so I never did see any white people after that except naval people. And so I went to Guadalcanal, and there's a series of islands down in that area. The battles for Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands, that's where we went. But those battles had already been fought by the time we got there. Actually, my uncle, J.P. Allen, was at Quartermaster and the landings and so forth. But we, after we got down there, we went to Hollandia, I think that's the way you pronounce it, which was on New Guinea. And it was a big staging area, and we took our ship down there and got ready to join the fleet, I guess you'd call it, because we had operated pretty much solo up until that time. And after we were there, I kept sort of a log of what we did and so forth. And my daughter, Laura Emmon, read it to me this morning, and some of the little islands, I could remember the names of them, but I don't remember much about them. They were atolls, A-T-O-L-L, or just small islands where the Japs had captured at the start of the war. And that was MacArthur's, who was in Australia. That was the beginning of his long trip back to the Philippines. So he said when he left the Philippines, he said, "I will return." That was a famous statement, and this was part of his group. I was in the Navy, of course, but he was running the whole South Pacific campaign. And I never did like him much, but I didn't have much to do with him either. So,
Did you have any exposure to him at all? I mean, was he where you were at any time? Or?
well, I'll tell you about that in just a second. After those 2 landings down there, where there was ferocious combat and the landings, our ship was the kind of ship that we went up, and the bow of the ship went up and landed on the beach. And before we hit the beach with the ship, we let out a stern anchor, so that we had to make sure we always went on the beach at high tide, so we would get far enough on the beach so the men or equipment could get into where they wouldn't be over the heads if the tide started going down. And we would go up on the beach and open up our bow doors, and then a ramp let down, and whoever we had on the ship, whether it be Marines or tanks or soldiers or whoever that we were carrying to that specific place, they would all be getting off our ship onto the land to start the invasion, like I'm sure most of you have seen. And D-Day was just like that, except a little tiny island somewhere, and we recaptured those two islands, and they were right down in the those series of islands all the way from New Guinea up to the Philippines, and they had different names of each group. And as we moved north toward the Philippines, there would be bases of harbors at each one of these little islands. Where if we went back to say New Guinea to pick up another load of something, equipment, we would then come back up to the islands we recaptured and get ready to make the next step up the line toward the Philippines. And I suppose, I've got it written down here somewhere, but I suppose we made about 2 or 3 landings on our way back, on our way to the Philippines, and each one of these places we recaptured fairly quickly. They were so small, but there was a lot of action, so to speak. The Jap planes would.
You were taking fire?
Oh yeah. Almost every time we went into the beach on an invasion, we were being shot at either by planes flying over, or the Japs would be back on the beach and they'd be hurling waters at the beach, and our people were safe compared to the soldiers out there trying to take the actual land itself. But we were sitting right there, well, like a sitting duck almost. And then I think we started for the final trip to the Philippines, and the first, and this was the biggest convoy that I'd ever seen. It was huge, and we were in a regular convoy of other LSTs, and all the ships like ours that were carrying equipment and men. So in the middle of the convoy, and on each side they had the smaller gunboats like destroyers, and then outside of those they had cruisers which were bigger. In other words, they were protecting ships like ours from submarines, and we had a lot of torpedoes that were shot at us by submarines. I mean, it almost seemed like, it doesn't make much sense talking about it because it happened so often that we got used to it, and I saw many ships, because I was in lots of convoys, many ships shot out from under the American sailors and went down, and we shot down several airplanes, and we picked up a lot of Americans out of the water, and we picked up a number of Japanese that had been shot down out of the water. Those we put in a so-called brig, which was just a little space with some bars on it, down below decks, but there was a lot of action going on, and it was mainly from submarines at that time. But when we got to the Philippines, the island of Leyte, L-E-Y-T-E, was the first island that we hit or landed on, and we were because we had troops on our ships, and we could go right up on the beach and let those soldiers and Marines out, and they went over went up the ramp, and then we could pull ourselves off the beach. We'd put the stern anchor out, and we would sort of put it in the ship in reverse, and the anchor would pull us off the beach, and most of the time the tide had gone down. It was timed so that the tide would go down somewhere, make it easier to get off the beach. But Joe, you asked me a minute ago, did I ever run into MacArthur? And he made this grandiose statement about I will return when he left the Philippines and Corregidor Island and Bataan 2 or 3 years before, and made this statement that I will return. And he did run the war from Australia after being on Corregidor. But since we were one of the first amphibious ships on the beach, I looked down about, I forget, one way, east to west on the beach, and saw a lot of photographers out there. And there was fighting going on and everything else, and those photographers out there. And it was General MacArthur stepping off of LVCP, landing vehicle personnel, something, and he is such a show off that every time he'd step off to get his pants a little wet, and the photographers would tell him to, how about doing it once more, General? He'd get back on the boat and land again. We all just weren't saving our lives at that point. And I was always up on the bridge. Even when I was a Seaman second class, we didn't have any quartermasters that were above me, except the executive officer of the ship, and the executive officer was the second officer next to the captain, and he was in charge of all navigation. And they had what they call a special sea detail, and that meant that whenever you did anything special, like going into land, or general quarters, if we happened to think we were going to be strafed, anytime there was anything major going on, everybody had a station, and my station was the helmsman, and I've been that ever since I've been on the ship. I was an assistant navigator to the executive officer, but in special detail I took over the helm, and the executive officer was down on the bridge with me, and the captain was up top side of the bridge where he was directing everything, and he would be yelling his commands down to me at the helm through a tube, and so that's where I was nearly all the time during the invasion.
So you had a good view of what was going on?
Yeah, I think so. I saw everything from up at the top and listening to the officers. And the radio shack was right next to the bridge, so I could hear all the radio from one ship to another. And, I sort of had a feel of the whole thing. Although a little ship like ours, we weren't very important, so, but at least we could hear if they wanted cannon fire from battleships, which were maybe 5 miles in back of us, we could hear the flagship, or the officer of the flagship, who was directing the whole invasion, or telling everybody what to do, and it exciting. And eventually anyway, we stayed at Leyte for, I forget, about a week after the landing, and then we went back to some other island, may have been New Guinea again, and picked up more troops and went back to the Philippines, and we had another landing on an island a little south of Leyte called Mindanao, Mindaro, or something like that. And that was just one more of the same. And then after that, we went to an island, Philippine island, and right to the west, of Leyte. So, I guess it's west. Yeah. And we made another landing this is the island of Cebu, C-E-B-U. And at that point, I think they let us have a few weeks rest, and we hung around Cebu, and we went on Liberty, and pretty wild place for a bunch of sailors that been out there. It seemed like a long time then, but it turned out it wasn't too long. But
What were the people like?
well, they hated the Japs so much. They told us Japanese atrocities, like they would tie some civilian to a pole and put honey all over them or some sort of sweet thing, and then set the bees out where they would just eat the honey and finally kill the person. But they hated the Japs so much, I think, and we probably had such good propaganda that they really liked us. And I got to know a couple of little Cebu females, which we didn't have much to do in the afternoon, and one of them I really liked. I don't know whether I should say this on this or not, but she was about 17 or 16 or something. Prettiest, well, I think I got a picture of her.
Yeah, we're going to show her a picture.
Yeah, and every afternoon she'd show up on the banks of on the ladder going up to our ship, waiting on me, and she had the most perfectly white, starched, starched dress, so clean, and eventually found out she didn't wear anything under it, which was pretty nice. We'd go off in the hills and behind and on Cebu and take a picnic with something, a beer, and I was so crazy. I said, maybe I'll marry this girl. I don't know.
Yeah, we're showing her picture now. She's going to be on the tape.
And well, from there, we went to the biggest island in the Philippines. Is an island called Luzon, where the capital of Manila was, and that's where MacArthur had been stationed for years as head of the Pacific Fleet until the Japanese ran them out of Luzon. And we went up there and made our landing in Luzon, at Luzon. And it was the first landing that had been made there since MacArthur had left. And we made several landings in or around a place called Subic Bay, S-U-B-I-C. And it was a little north, on the northwest coast of Luzon. and it was a wonderful. I mean, it was a great bay for anybody, the Japs or us, or whoever controlled that, had a great harbor to put all our ships in and for temporarily. And we took back Subic Bay, and while we were there, one of the most exciting things that we did in the whole war was to, while we were there, they sent us just our one ship, and I don't know who there was, people like, I guess maybe they call them Green Berets then, but I don't really know. They were special forces. And we went around north, around the Japanese, where the fighting was going. It came in back of the fighting. In other words, we were behind the so-called lines and let these specialized forces off up there. And just about the time we thought we had gotten away with it, the planes started coming over, and we got back all right, but they saw that we were just a little ship, and I don't think they paid much attention to us after strafing it a few times, and eventually we went back to that was pretty much the end of the Philippines, as we had recaptured almost any islands that we wanted to, and it took, I don't know, it took 6 or 9 months. I really don't remember the dates, but we were in the Philippines the whole time, except when we went back to some other place that had, we picked up more troops or more cargo or whatever. And it was getting toward what people thought was the end of the war, and that we were going into Japan to make a landing in Japan proper itself. But there were 2 islands between the Philippines and Japan, and one was called Okinawa, and the other one was called Iwo Jima. And we had to capture those 2 islands, and they were little islands, but very fortified, had a lot of fortification on them, and we had to capture them because B-17s or none of the planes could fly from the islands that we had in the Philippines, or that was the closest we had at that time to Japan. And because of fuel, they couldn't go that far and return, so we had to capture these 2 islands, Okinawa and Japan. So everybody was sort of preparing for that, and I forget how many, probably a month or so, everybody was getting ready, and you couldn't hardly have been in both places because it happened pretty much the same time, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And I'm sure all of you have seen pictures of the flag going up in Iwo Jima, but we were in Okinawa. Excuse me, they sent us to Okinawa, and that was the first time we had ever seen in abundance suicide planes. These Japanese were flying the planes, and they were just trying to dive into the biggest ship they could find, and just, they committed suicide, but they sank a lot of ships that way, and we stayed around Okinawa for several weeks, and I don't remember why. We were probably hauling cargo or men from one side of the island to the other, but that was probably as much, well, every place that had fighting going on, but this was the most constant, guess you'd call, they were trying to, we were all out the harbor off the shore of Okinawa, and these planes would just fly over all day long and try it, and we'd try to shoot them down, and we did over Latin Route. They sank a lot of ships there too. But we couldn't have gone into Japan without having those 2 hours as a stop off to the planes to have enough fuel to get back. And as most of you know, I'm sure, they were 2 of the fiercest battles in the Pacific. And we were around for until both of them, well, I didn't really know much what was going on in Iwo Jima until later, but we were around till they were both secure, and we captured the airfields, and then we just sort of stayed around that, getting ready for the to go into Japan itself. And there was a lot of things we had to do. I mean, we got used to, well, one thing that happened, we were usually in convoy. Might have been 20 ships and might have been 200 ships. And the Japs had learned when they were attacking us at sea, and we went convoy, they would fly very low between the lines of ships, which would be horizontal to each other and going in a vertical direction. They would fly low between 2 lines of the ship, and we'd be shooting at the planes, and half the time we'd be shooting at the other ships where they were between us, and the plane was between us and 2 lines of the convoy, and they were smart enough to, a lot of them got shot down because they were very close to the ships, but they caused a lot of, and we caused a lot of damage ourselves, I suppose, in shooting it into the other ships, and that was about, well, while we were waiting in Okinawa, President Truman decided to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And when the Japanese saw that, that was when they surrendered. So we actually never did go into Japan in any military way. I mean, we went immediately after the islands were secure. And one thing interesting that I did while we were sent in to, can't remember what it was, Yokohama Bay or I think it was Yokohama Bay, where the surrender of the Japanese to the Americans was going to be held by General MacArthur would sign the surrender papers with the Japanese. And we were there for maybe a couple of weeks, I guess. And since they had let, the captain was allowed to let a few people off the ship when we first got to Japan. And one of my buddies, it might have been 2, I had 2 very close friends that were on the ship. They'd been there all the time. And since I'd been on longer than anybody, they had let me be one of the 3 to go ashore. And one of us said, I can't remember who, one of us said, let's go down to Hiroshima. And this was about I think less than a week after the bomb had been dropped. No one told us not to go. And we didn't know anything about radiation or anything like that. And so we started hitchhiking. We knew which direction Hiroshima was in. And we started hitchhiking, and all of a sudden, this big black Cadillac limousine stopped, and there was a chauffeur driving it, and there's this man in the back seat, and he turned out to be a doctor from Tokyo, and he had on a morning suit. I mean, he looked like he was going to a wedding, and he was going down to treat all the people at Hiroshima. And we got down there. He took us all the way right to where all the people were, lying all over the ground with burned faces and chests and dead. And on a riverbank which runs almost through the town of Hiroshima. And he said, he spoke quite fluent English, and he said, boys, if you all want to go back to Yokohama Bay, I'm going back about 6 o'clock tonight. I'm going to stay down here and work all day, and if you meet me right here, a little before 6, I'll drive you back to your ship. Couldn't have been nicer. And so Hiroshima was absolutely, it almost looked like I mean, it was just burnt. Everything was burnt to the ground. There might have been one side of a building standing up somewhere, but the other 3 sides had been demolished and were on the ground. And it was just a vast wasteland. So we walked around all day and talked to a few of the people, and most of them couldn't speak English, so it was sad. And more than sad, it was almost obscene. How come when the atomic bomb dropped, and we were right there a few days after it had been dropped, and there were thousands and thousands of people that were just lying along a riverbank, just waiting for help, somebody to come see if they could do anything. But it almost reminded me of pictures from Gone with the Wind of when the doctors were working on the man that had been injured, and they were throwing all the arms and legs over in one basket somewhere, after they amputating. And it changed my mind about a lot of things, just by being there. I'm almost a pacifist now. But that has happened since I was in the Pacific. But being out there, it's like any other war, I suppose. If you haven't been there, you really don't appreciate how violent and terrible it is. And eventually, we left down there. I'm very much, and I've read a lot about dropping the bomb and so forth, and there are 2 different feelings about it. One is that we saved a lot of American lives not having to make the landing. In Japan, it said there have been several million people of some horrific number, I can't remember exactly, if we had to go in Japan and make landing, both on our side and their side. And but I've always felt that our diplomats were very close to making some sort of deal of unconditional surrender by the Japanese to us, and everything I've read since then. Some people think they were closer than others think. I mean, it could have been a matter of days, it could have been a matter of weeks, but it was very close. And my feeling has always been that the bomb should not have been dropped, and given diplomacy a little more time to work out after seeing it for myself. visualizing what it could have been if we had gone in there. I've read several books lately about the top 8 men in our military and administration in Washington. The top 8 men, and no one suggested that we not drop it. And that's Truman had the final say, and he decided to drop it. So, but I've always thought it was wrong, and the longer I live, I feel that I'm more positive about my feelings, but I'm sure I'm in a minority. But it was just the feeling that I had. At the time, our ship stayed in Japan after the surrender, probably about 6 months, making runs between one of the Japanese islands and another, carrying cargo, men, everything else. And we would go ashore on all those Japanese, men of the northernmost island, which was Hokkaido. We finally got some liberty, and we went in there and stayed about, I don't know, the ship was there for a couple of weeks, but we got liberty 3 or 4 days, and we went up, snow all on the ground, and we went to, I guess you'd call it a geisha house, where there were geisha girls, but the food was good, it was all like a hotel.
Let's stop just a second.